In Dallas, inside the roaring Glory and Grace megachurch, a crowd of 10,000 gathered for what was supposed to be a peaceful charity showcase. A celebrity pastor and a defiant fighter stood beneath the same lights until faith itself was challenged. Bishop T.D. Jakes wasn't your typical preacher. For decades, he'd shepherded millions through trials of spirit and doubt, known for turning confrontation into conviction. When Jordan the Cobra Reigns, a rising MMA star infamous for mocking religion, sneered that faith can't stop fists, he didn't know who was watching. Chuck Norris, Air Force veteran, world karate champion, and a man who'd turned mastery into ministry, rose quietly from the front row. When the young fighter challenged faith itself, he had no idea he was stepping into a lesson only pain could teach. Norris responded not with rage, but with restraint. A calm, so powerful, it disarmed the crowd and shattered the Cobra's pride. What began as spectacle became scripture in motion. That night, the church became a battlefield, and Dallas would never forget when T.D. Jakes challenged Chuck Norris to prove his faith and heaven itself seemed to answer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Glory and Grace megachurch shimmered under spotlights, transformed from a place of Sunday worship into something entirely new. 10,000 seats surrounded a central stage where a boxing ring had been erected not for violence, but for demonstration. Massive screens hung from the ceiling, broadcasting close-ups of faces in the crowd, celebrities, fighters, everyday believers. Banners stretched across the vaulted ceiling. Faith and power. Strength through spirit. Bishop T.D. Jakes stood center stage, microphone in hand, his powerful voice reverberating through the arena. Dressed in an impeccably tailored gray suit, he commanded attention not through volume but through presence, a spiritual gravity that drew all eyes to him. "Strength without purpose is just force," he proclaimed, pacing deliberately. "And purpose without strength is just intention. Tonight we bring them together." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras panned across faces beaming with anticipation. In the front row, nearly invisible despite his fame, sat Chuck Norris. At 75, his face was weathered but his posture remained military straight. He wore a simple black button-down shirt and jeans, no flashy jewelry or designer labels. Unlike the celebrities who made grand entrances, Chuck had slipped in quietly, nodding to security with the humility that had become his trademark. "God gives us strength not to dominate others," Jakes continued, "but to lift them up. Not to prove ourselves, but to serve." His voice rose and fell like music. "Tonight's charity event isn't just about raising money for our youth martial arts ministry. It's about showing our young people that discipline and faith walk hand in hand." Alyssa Carter adjusted her earpiece, her network's logo emblazoned on her microphone as she prepared for her next live segment. At 32, she'd covered everything from political campaigns to natural disasters, but this assignment felt different. She'd expected to find either aggressive showmanship or empty platitudes. Instead, the energy in the room was electric with something else, something harder to dismiss. "We're live. In 5. Her producer's voice crackled in her ear. She smoothed her blazer, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Ready in 3, 2. I'm standing inside what might be the most unique charity event Texas has seen," Alyssa began, her voice professional but tinged with genuine curiosity. "Behind me, 10,000 people have gathered not just for spectacle, but for what Bishop T.D. Jakes calls a demonstration of faith in action." The camera followed her gesture toward the ring. "Coming up next is a demonstration from one of MMA's most controversial rising stars, Jordan the Cobra Reigns." who's agreed to participate despite his well-documented skepticism about religion. Behind the scenes, in a small green room, converted from a prayer room, Jordan, the Cobra Reigns, shadowboxed in front of a mirror. At 27, his 6'2" frame was a sculpture of muscle and sinew, each movement precise and lethal. A massive cobra tattoo curled up his right arm, its fangs bared at his neck. "You ready for this crowd, champ?" asked his manager, scrolling through his phone. Jordan smirked, throwing another combination at his reflection. Ready to show them what real power looks like. Deacon Ellis, head of church security, stood by the door watching silently. A former Marine with 20 years of service, Ellis had traded his uniform for a simple black suit, an earpiece, his only visible equipment. He'd been briefed about Jordan the fighter's arrogance, his social media posts mocking religion, his tendency to go off script. Ellis's expression remained neutral, but his eyes tracked the fighter's every move. 5 minutes. "Mr. Reigns," Ellis said, his deep voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who never needed to shout to be heard. Jordan glanced at him, taking in the man's disciplined stance. "Don't worry, churchman. I'll behave." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Mostly. Back in the arena, Jakes was introducing the next segment. "Part of our mission tonight is to bridge worlds that seem separate but aren't. Physical discipline and spiritual discipline. Strength of body and strength of character." He gestured toward a video playing on the massive screens, children in dojos, learning not just kicks and punches but meditation, respect, focus. "Our youth programs teach that true mastery begins with mastering yourself." In the front row, Chuck Norris nodded almost imperceptibly. He'd spent decades teaching children the same principles through his Kickstart Kids program. Faith wasn't just something you talked about on Sundays, it was how you lived when the cameras were off and no one was watching. Alyssa noticed the camera catching Chuck's reaction, and she made a mental note to include it in her coverage. Even to her skeptical eye, there was something compelling about the contrast between the quiet legend and the bombastic young fighter about to take the stage. "And now," Jakes's voice pulled the audience's attention back, "to demonstrate the physical excellence our programs aspire to develop, please welcome Jordan, the Cobra Reigns." The arena's lighting shifted dramatically, and hip-hop blasted through the speakers. Jordan burst from the entrance tunnel, arms raised in victory before he'd done anything to earn it. He wore fight shorts emblazoned with his Cobra logo and nothing else, his chiseled torso gleaming under the lights. He danced his way down the aisle, playing to the crowd. The response was mixed cheers from fight fans who recognized the UFC's fastest rising star. Polite applause from church members, unsure what to make of the display, and scattered murmurs from those who'd seen his social media mockery of religion. Jordan vaulted over the ropes into the ring, grabbed the microphone from the stand, and circled like a predator. "How's everyone doing tonight?" he shouted, his voice echoing. "Ready to see what a real fighter looks like?" More cheers rose from the audience, though notably less than half. Jake stepped back, allowing the young man his moment while maintaining a dignified presence at the edge of the ring. Behind his smile was a calculating wisdom. Sometimes the best sermons weren't delivered from pulpits. "For tonight's demonstration," Jordan continued, "I'll need a volunteer. Someone who thinks they've got skills." His eyes scanned the crowd, settling momentarily on Chuck Norris before moving on. A flicker of something recognition, perhaps respect, crossed his face, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. A middle-aged man in a black G raised his hand. He was one of the program's instructors. 5th degree, black belt, former competitive fighter, now devoted to teaching. "Perfect," Jordan said, beckoning him into the ring. "Don't worry. I'll go easy. This is church, after all." The last words carried just enough sarcasm to make Deacon Ellis straighten at his post. As the volunteer entered the ring, Jordan handed the microphone back. and began loosening his shoulders. The instructor bowed respectfully. Jordan did not return the gesture. In the front row, Chuck's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in his eyes. A focus. An assessment. He'd seen this story play out countless times. Talent without humility, skill without wisdom. The young needed to learn these lessons for themselves, often the hard way. Alyssa moved closer to the ring, her cameraman following. This wasn't just about capturing the action, there was a story unfolding. Something beneath the surface that her journalistic instincts couldn't ignore. This demonstration, Jakes reminded everyone, his voice regaining control of the moment, is about the harmony of mind, body, and spirit, about how discipline channels our strength toward higher purpose. Jordan bounced on the balls of his feet, his smile fixed, his eyes predatory. "Let's see what faith can do against these," he said under his breath, just loud enough for the instructor to hear, flexing his arms as the ref signaled for them to begin. No one yet realized that what was about to unfold would transcend simple exhibition. In this ring, built for demonstration but about to become a proving ground, two worldviews were about to collide, one shouting for attention, the other silent but unshakable. And watching it all with quiet intensity, Chuck Norris waited, a living embodiment of the lesson Jordan had yet to learn. The ring's canvas floor vibrated with each step as Jordan circled the instructor. The older man maintained a traditional stance, balanced, centered, patient. Jordan, by contrast, moved with the flashy, camera-ready style that had made him famous, hands low, chin raised, inviting attack. "Remember," Bishop Jakes called from ringside, "this is a demonstration of skill and control." Jordan's smirk widened. "Absolutely, Bishop." But the look in his eyes told a different story. The instructor moved first. A measured jab meant to establish distance. Jordan slipped it effortlessly, countering with blinding speed. His technique was flawless, honed through thousands of hours of training. But there was something else in his movements. Arrogance. A need to dominate rather than demonstrate. In the third row, a young boy leaned forward, eyes wide with admiration. He wore a white karate gi with a yellow belt. A beginner in the church's martial arts program. Next to him, his father watched with more caution than excitement. Jordan landed a quick combination that sent the instructor back a step. Nothing damaging, but the message was clear. "I'm better than you." The crowd shifted uneasily. This wasn't the respectful exhibition they expected. "The Cobra's looking sharp tonight," Alyssa narrated for her broadcast, keeping her tone neutral despite her growing discomfort. Though this seems less like a demonstration and more like. She trailed off as Jordan landed a harder strike than necessary, causing the instructor to stumble. There was audible concern from the crowd now. Deacon Ellis moved closer to the ring, his hand touching his earpiece. Chuck Norris hadn't moved, but his focus had intensified. He watched not just Jordan's technique, which was admittedly impressive, but the intention behind it. The young fighter wasn't here to teach or inspire. He was here to feed his ego. Chuck had seen it countless times in his decades in martial arts, talent corrupted by pride. The instructor recovered his balance and resumed his stance. He was outmatched in speed and youth, but not in dignity. He circled carefully, breathing evenly as he'd taught hundreds of students to do when facing adversity. "Come on, churchman," Jordan taunted under his breath, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Thought you had God on your side?" The instructor didn't respond to the provocation. He executed a textbook front kick, technically sound, but easily read by a fighter of Jordan's caliber. Jordan didn't just avoid it. He countered with unnecessary force, landing a right hook that sent the older man staggering back into the ropes. The crowd gasped. Bishop Jake stepped forward, ready to end the demonstration, but before he could speak, Jordan pressed his advantage. A flurry of strikes, each one just controlled enough to avoid causing serious injury but hard enough to humiliate, backed the instructor into the corner. "That's enough," Jakes called. But his voice was drowned out as Jordan landed a final blow that sent the instructor to one knee. Jordan raised his arms in victory, playing to the audience, particularly to the sections filled with fight fans who'd come to see the Cobra in action. Some cheered, mostly younger men who recognized the technical brilliance on display, but many sat in uncomfortable silence. The instructor rose slowly, dignity intact despite the outcome. He bowed to Jordan, to the ring, to the audience, following protocol even when his opponent would not. Jordan grabbed the microphone again. "And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the difference between talking about power and having it." He was breathing hard, not from exertion, but excitement. "Thanks to my man here for being a good sport." He gestured to the instructor, who exited the ring quietly. Jakes moved to reclaim control of the event, but Jordan wasn't finished. "You know what I've noticed?" He paced the ring like a preacher himself now. "Everyone talks about faith moving mountains. But when it's time to step in here," he stomped the canvas, "faith doesn't block a left hook." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Deacon Ellis spoke urgently into his wrist mic, but Jakes held up a hand, signaling to let this play out. Jordan continued, emboldened by the reaction. "Don't get me wrong. I respect what you're doing with these kids. Teaching discipline. Respect. I'm all for it." His voice dripped with condescension. "But let's not confuse spirituality with actual strength." Alyssa's cameraman zoomed in on Jordan's face, capturing the mix of charisma and contempt that made him both magnetic and polarizing. Her producer's voice buzzed in her ear. "This is gold. Stay on him." But Alyssa's journalistic instincts pulled her attention elsewhere, to the front row, where Chuck Norris sat motionless, watching with the calm of someone who'd weathered storms that would have broken lesser men. Jordan noticed the camera shift and tracked its focus to Chuck. His expression changed, a flicker of genuine recognition crossing his face before the performer's mask returned. "Speaking of real strength," Jordan said, voice rising with performative excitement, "I just noticed we have a legend in the house tonight." He pointed directly at Chuck. "Ladies and gentlemen, the man, the myth, Chuck Norris himself." The crowd erupted in genuine applause. Chuck nodded once in acknowledgement, neither encouraging nor discouraging the attention. "Now there's a man who understands what I'm talking about," Jordan continued. "Chuck didn't become a 6-time world karate champion by praying about it. He did it with these." He held up his fists. "Am I right, Chuck?" The question hung in the air. The arena fell silent, waiting for Chuck's response. He remained seated, his expression unreadable. Jake stepped into the ring, moving with deliberate calm. He took the microphone from Jordan with gentle firmness. "Thank you for that energetic demonstration, Mr. Raines." His voice carried neither anger nor rebuke, just quiet authority. "You're right about one thing. Discipline is essential. What you're missing is its source." Jordan shrugged, still riding the high of his performance. He flexed for a group of young women in the front section, who giggled and took photos on their phones. Jakes turned to address the crowd. "Physical strength without spiritual groundedness is like a house built on sand." He gestured to the instructor, who now stood dignified at ringside. Master Chen demonstrated something more powerful than any punch tonight. He showed respect, even when it wasn't returned. Jordan rolled his eyes, visible to those closest to the ring. He mouthed, "Whatever," to his entourage in the second row. "Our youth programs," Jakes continued, teach that true mastery begins within. It's not about dominating others, but controlling yourself. With all due respect, Bishop, Jordan interrupted, stepping closer to Jake's. That sounds great in church. But in the real world, the stronger man wins. He was smiling, but there was a challenge in his eyes. Faith doesn't win fights. These do. He raised his fists again. The tension in the arena thickened. This wasn't in the program a theological debate between a pastor and a prizefighter. But something electric in the moment kept everyone riveted. Jake studied Jordan for a long moment. Then, with the timing of a man who'd spent decades reading audiences, he turned toward the front row. "Chuck," he called, "would you mind joining us for a moment?" The crowd buzzed with excitement. Chuck Norris had been sitting so quietly that some had forgotten he was there. Now, all eyes turned to him. Chuck remained still for a moment, then rose with deliberate calm. He wore no flashy clothing, carried no air of celebrity. Yet his presence seemed to fill the arena as he walked to the ring steps. Jordan watched, his cocky smile faltering slightly. This wasn't planned. He'd expected to deliver his demonstration, soak up some attention, and be on his way. Now, something else was happening. Chuck entered the ring with the easy grace of a man who'd spent more time there than out of it. He shook Jake's hand firmly, then turned to Jordan and offered the same courtesy. Jordan took it, his usual bravado momentarily replaced by genuine respect. "Chuck," Jake said, "our young friend here has some interesting thoughts about the relationship between faith and strength. Since you've lived both as a champion fighter and a man of deep conviction, perhaps you could share your perspective?" Chuck nodded, taking the microphone. The arena fell silent, 10,000 people leaning forward to catch every word from a man known for letting his actions speak instead. "First," Chuck said, his voice steady and unadorned, "I want to thank Jordan for his demonstration. No sarcasm, no hidden meaning, just simple courtesy. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Jordan nodded, uncertain how to respond to genuine graciousness. "When I was about your age," Chuck continued, addressing Jordan directly now, "I thought strength was about dominance too, about proving something." He paused, the weight of decades of experience in his words. "It took me years to understand that real power isn't about who you can defeat. It's about what you choose to stand for." The crowd was motionless, captivated not by volume or charisma, but by authenticity. "My faith doesn't make me a better fighter," Chuck said. "It makes me a better man. And being a better man makes me a better fighter." Jordan shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the direction this was taking, but too aware of Chuck's stature to dismiss it outright. "With respect, sir," Jordan said. The "sir," surprising even himself. Faith is faith, and fighting is fighting. When someone's trying to take your head off, prayer isn't going to stop their fist. Chuck smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "You're absolutely right." Jordan blinked, caught off guard by the agreement. "Prayer won't stop a punch," Chuck continued, "but it might help you remember why you're fighting in the first place, and who you're fighting for." Before Jordan could respond, chants erupted from the section filled with MMA fans. "Cobra! Cobra!" They were trying to regain momentum for their champion, uncomfortable with seeing him in any position but dominance. Jordan's confidence returned with their support. He played to them, raising a fist in acknowledgement. "Tell you what," he said, turning back to Chuck with his cockiness restored. "Why don't we settle this debate the old-fashioned way?" He gestured to the ring around them. "Show these good people, What moves mountains, faith or these? He raised his fists again. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Was he seriously challenging Chuck Norris? Alyssa pressed her earpiece closer, her producer practically shouting, "Tell me you're getting this!" Deacon Ellis stepped forward, hand moving inside his jacket, but Jakes once again signaled him to stand down. Chuck's expression didn't change. He looked at Jordan not with anger or offense, but with something closer to compassion, the way a father might look at a son who had yet to learn a difficult but necessary lesson. The moment stretched, the entire arena holding its breath. Chuck handed the microphone back to Jakes without answering the challenge. Jordan's face flushed with what might have been embarrassment or anger. "No disrespect meant, sir," he added hastily, sensing he'd crossed a line. "Just a friendly exhibition." Jakes took the microphone, his eyes moving between the young fighter and the seasoned master. In that moment, he saw not just an uncomfortable situation to diffuse, but an opportunity, a living parable unfolding before 10,000 witnesses. "Jordan," he said, his voice carrying the weight of moral authority without a trace of condemnation, "you've questioned whether faith can stand against force. Perhaps it's time for a demonstration of a different kind." The arena fell into a hush so complete that Alyssa could hear the hum of the air conditioning system. The tension wasn't hostile, it was reverent, as if everyone sensed something momentous about to unfold. Bishop Jakes stood between Chuck Norris and Jordan Rains, a living bridge between two worlds. His voice, when he spoke, carried the measured cadence of a man choosing his words with precise intent. "Tonight's event is called Faith and Power for a reason," Jakes said. "Not faith versus power, but faith and power inseparable, like body and spirit." He turned to Jordan. "You've demonstrated physical excellence, but there's another kind of strength these young people need to see." Jordan shifted his weight, uncomfortable at having the script flipped. He'd come to showcase his skills, to be the center of attention. Now he felt control of the moment slipping away. "Chuck," Jakes continued, turning to the legend, "would you be willing to demonstrate what strength looks like when it's grounded in something deeper than the self?" The question hung in the air. 10,000 people leaned forward, including the young boy in the third row, his yellow belt tied crookedly around his small waist, eyes wide with anticipation. Chuck considered the request, his weathered face revealing nothing. When he finally nodded, the gesture was so slight that those in the back rows might have missed it entirely. "What exactly are we doing here?" Jordan asked, trying to reclaim his footing. "A push-up contest?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. Jakes didn't answer immediately. He scanned the crowd, taking in the faces of the children present, the skeptics, the believers, the fight fans looking for spectacle. Then he turned back to Jordan. "You believe faith has no place in the ring," Jakes said. "That when faced with physical threat, spiritual strength is irrelevant." It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of the young fighter's position. "No disrespect," Jordan replied. "But yeah, faith doesn't block punches." Jakes nodded. "Then perhaps a demonstration is in order." He addressed the crowd. "What we're about to witness isn't a fight. It's a lesson, one that can't be taught with words alone." In the front row, Deacon Ellis tensed. This wasn't part of the security plan. His eyes swept the arena, assessing potential problems if things escalated. But something in Jakes's calm assurance made him hold his position. Chuck removed his watch, handing it to Jakes with the casual motion of a man who had nothing to prove. His movements were fluid despite his age, the kind of ease that comes from decades of discipline rather than natural talent. Jordan watched, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. The cocky smile remained, but it was more fixed now, less genuine. He glanced at his entourage in the second row, his manager, his social media director, 2 women he'd brought as arm candy for the after-party. They looked back with expressions ranging from excitement to concern. "What are the rules?" Jordan asked, bouncing lightly on the balls of his feet, trying to recapture his earlier energy. "There's only one," Chuck said, his voice quiet but carrying through the silent arena. "Control yourself." Jordan laughed, but the sound was hollow. "That's it? No rounds? No point system?" Chuck shook his head. "No rounds. Just one lesson." The crowd murmured, uncertain what they were about to witness. Jake stepped back, creating space in the center of the ring. He raised the microphone once more. "What you're about to see," he told the audience, "is the difference between power that demands attention and power that commands respect." With that, he exited the ring, leaving Chuck and Jordan alone in the center. The house lights dimmed slightly, spotlights focusing on the 2 men, one young and vibrant with physical prowess, the other older but carrying an intangible quality that even the most skeptical observer couldn't deny. Alyssa moved closer to the ring, her cameraman following. Her producer's voice buzzed in her ear. "What's happening? Is this planned?" But she ignored it, focused entirely on the unfolding moment. Her journalistic instincts told her this wasn't just a story, it was the story. "I guess I'll start," Jordan said, settling into his fighting stance, hands up, chin tucked, weight balanced. It was textbook perfection, the product of countless hours of drilling. Chuck simply stood, hands at his sides, expression neutral. "Whenever you're ready." The young boy in the 3rd row tugged his father's sleeve. "Dad, is Chuck Norris gonna fight?" His father shook his head. "I don't think so, son. I think he's going to teach." Jordan circled slowly, his fighter's instincts analyzing Chuck's posture, looking for weaknesses, openings, tells. He found none. The older man simply stood, turning slightly to keep Jordan in view, but otherwise motionless. "This is kind of awkward," Jordan called out, playing to the crowd. "Are we doing this, or what?" Chuck didn't respond with words. He simply waited, his presence filling the ring more completely than Jordan's movement ever could. The crowd's energy shifted. The fight fans who'd been chanting "Cobra" fell silent. The children sat forward. Even the skeptics, the ones who'd come for spectacle, or to mock the mixing of faith and fighting, found themselves holding their breath. Jordan, sensing the shift and disliking it, decided to force action. He threw a quick jab, not full power, but quick and sharp, meant to provoke a response. Chuck didn't block it. He simply wasn't there when the punch arrived, having shifted his weight so slightly that it was hard to tell he'd moved at all. Jordan blinked, momentarily confused. He threw another combination jab, cross, low kick, each strike technically flawless. Chuck moved like water around stone, redirecting rather than opposing, conserving energy while Jordan expended it. There was no wasted motion, no flashy evasion, just economy of movement so refined it bordered on invisible. The crowd began to murmur again, this time with a different energy. They weren't watching a fight, they were witnessing mastery. "Come on," Jordan said, frustration edging into his voice. "At least throw something back." Chuck remained silent, his breathing calm, his eyes never leaving Jordan's. There was no anger in his gaze, no competitive fire, only focus, and a depth of presence that seemed to fill the ring. Jordan's next attacks came faster, harder. His technique remained sharp, but there was an edge of desperation now, a need to provoke a reaction. Each strike met empty air as Chuck moved with the calm precision of a man who had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. In the audience, Alyssa found herself holding her breath. Next to her, the cameraman whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." She hadn't either. It wasn't that Chuck was faster or stronger. Jordan clearly held the physical advantages of youth and peak conditioning. But there was something else at work. Something that made the difference between them seem vast, despite the close quarters. Jordan paused, breathing harder now. Not from exertion, but from mounting frustration. "Is this supposed to prove something?" he called out, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Running away isn't fighting." Chuck finally spoke, his voice carrying no judgment. "I haven't taken a single step backward." The observation silenced Jordan momentarily as he realized it was true. Throughout the exchange, Chuck had maintained his position while Jordan had covered twice the distance. "This is the first lesson," Chuck continued, addressing not just Jordan, but everyone watching. "Control begins with knowing where you stand." Jordan's expression hardened. The exhibition was not going as planned. He'd expected to showcase his skills, maybe even have a light sparring session with a legend. Instead, he was being... what? Taught? Exposed? Enough with the fortune cookie wisdom. He snapped, patience evaporating. Either fight or concede. Chuck's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his stance, a subtle readiness that hadn't been there before. "I'm not here to fight you, son. I'm here to show you something about yourself." The words hit Jordan like a physical blow. "Son." It triggered something. A memory, perhaps. Or a wound. His face flushed with a complex emotion that seemed to surprise even him. "Don't call me that," he said, voice lower now. "You don't know anything about me." Chuck nodded once. "You're right. I don't know your story." His eyes remained steady. "But I recognize the path you're on. I walked it myself once." The crowd had fallen so silent that his quiet words carried to the upper rows. No one moved. No one spoke. Not even the social media addicts who'd been live tweeting the event. Everyone sensed that what they were witnessing transcended spectacle. "I don't need a lecture," Jordan said, but the edge in his voice had softened slightly. "Especially not here. Not now." "Where better?" Chuck asked. "You questioned whether faith has power in the ring. This is your answer, not in words, but in what you're experiencing right now." Jordan shook his head, frustration mounting again. "What am I experiencing? An old man who won't engage?" "Look deeper," Chuck said. "Ask yourself why you need me to fight. Why proving your dominance matters so much." The question landed like a haymaker. Jordan's cocky facade cracked, just for an instant, revealing something vulnerable underneath. Then the mask returned, harder than before. "This is ridiculous," he said, turning to walk away. "I came to demonstrate fighting, not play philosopher." Chuck remained where he stood. Walking away is a choice too. There was no challenge in the words, no manipulation, just a statement of fact. Jordan stopped at the ropes, one hand gripping the top one. The arena waited. 10,000 people collectively holding their breath. The young boy in the third row whispered, "Don't go, Cobra." Slowly, Jordan turned back. Something had changed in his demeanor, a shift subtle enough that only those closest to the ring could see it. The performative cockiness had receded, replaced by something more genuine, if more conflicted. "What exactly do you want from me?" he asked, his voice carrying a ragged edge. Chuck met his gaze directly. "Not what I want from you. What I want for you." Jordan waited, uncharacteristically silent. "Freedom," Chuck said. "From having to prove yourself every moment of every day." The words hung in the air. Between them, Jordan's expression cycled through confusion, denial, anger, and finally, so briefly it might have been missed recognition. In that moment of vulnerability, Jake stepped back into the ring. He'd been watching carefully, understanding the delicate balance of what was unfolding. Not a spectacle for entertainment, but a human moment with the potential for genuine transformation. "This," Jake said, addressing the crowd but looking at Jordan, "is what we mean by faith and power. Not faith instead of power, but faith as the foundation that gives power meaning and direction." Jordan stood very still, caught between his public persona and something more authentic, struggling to emerge. "The strength that comes from faith," Jakes continued, "isn't about being untouchable. It's about remaining yourself even when touched by life's hardest blows." Chuck nodded once, acknowledging the truth in Jakes' words, but his eyes never left Jordan, seeing beyond the bravado to the young man underneath, talented, driven, but searching for something that victories alone couldn't provide. "I think," Chuck said quietly, "we've demonstrated enough for one night." Jordan looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once, a gesture so similar to Chuck's own that several people in the front row noticed the parallel. As he turned to leave the ring, something made Jordan pause. Instead of vaulting over the ropes as he'd entered, he walked to the steps and descended with deliberate calm. It was a small change, nearly imperceptible to most, but to those watching closely, Jakes, Chuck, Alyssa, with her reporter's eye, it spoke volumes. The crowd began to applaud, uncertain at first, then with growing conviction. They weren't entirely sure what they'd witnessed, but they sensed its importance, a moment where showmanship gave way to authenticity, where posturing yielded to truth. But the demonstration wasn't over. As Jordan reached the bottom of the steps, a commotion erupted in the section reserved for his most dedicated fans. A young man with a cobra tattoo matching Jordan's own vaulted the barricade and rushed toward the ring. "That's it?" he shouted, clearly intoxicated and enraged. "You're walking away? Fight him!" The drunk fan lurched forward, his movements erratic, but his intent clear. "Fight him!" he shouted again, pointing at Chuck. "Show this old man what real fighting looks like." Deacon Ellis moved with surprising speed for his size, intercepting the man before he could reach Jordan. Two other security team members converged, ready to remove the disruptor. "Wait!" Jordan called, raising a hand to stop them. The arena fell silent again, all eyes on the young fighter. Something had shifted in his demeanor, subtle but undeniable. The performative swagger had receded, replaced by a more centered presence. Jordan approached his fan, keeping a careful distance. "That's enough, man. This isn't what tonight is about." The intoxicated fan stared in confusion, swaying slightly. "But he made you look weak. You gotta show them." "No," Jordan said firmly. "I don't." The simple declaration hung in the air, carrying more weight than any of his earlier bravado. The fan's anger deflated, replaced by confusion. Deacon Ellis nodded to his team, who gently but firmly escorted the man toward the exit. As they passed, Ellis placed a hand on the drunk fan's shoulder, not restraining, but steadying. The gesture wasn't lost on Jordan, who watched the interaction with newfound attention. Back in the ring, Jake sensed the teachable moment. "This," he said into the microphone, addressing the crowd, "is the heart of what we're sharing tonight. Strength isn't about dominating others. It's about mastering yourself." Chuck had remained where he stood, calm and composed throughout the disruption. Now he approached Jordan, extending his hand without fanfare. Jordan hesitated only briefly before accepting the handshake. The contact lasted just moments, But everyone watching sensed its significance, not a formality, but a genuine acknowledgement between two men who understood what the other carried. "If you're willing," Jakes continued, "I'd like to invite both of you to demonstrate something else for these young people." He gestured toward the children in the audience, including the boy with the yellow belt who watched with rapt attention. "What did you have in mind?" Jordan asked, his tone lacking its earlier defensiveness. "The difference between fighting to prove something and moving with purpose," Jakes replied. He turned to Chuck. "Would you be willing to show these young people what decades of disciplined practice looks like? Not in combat, but in form?" Chuck nodded once. Without showmanship or announcement, he moved to the center of the ring and settled into a stance. What followed wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it captivated the arena more completely than any acrobatics could have. Chuck moved through a traditional form, with the fluid precision that comes only from thousands of repetitions performed with complete focus. Each movement flowed into the next. No wasted energy. No unnecessary flourish. Just pure, distilled mastery. The silence in the arena deepened as everyone watched. Even those who knew nothing about martial arts could recognize the difference between Chuck's movements and the showy techniques they'd seen in movies. This wasn't performance, it was meditation in motion. Alyssa, who had approached the demonstration with journalistic skepticism, found herself transfixed. Her cameraman had stopped narrating the shots he was capturing, equally absorbed by the quiet display of mastery. As Chuck completed the sequence, Jordan stood perfectly still, his expression thoughtful. When Chuck finished and returned to neutral stance, Jordan stepped forward. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the center of the ring. Chuck nodded and stepped aside. Jordan took his place, closed his eyes for a moment, and then began. He performed the same sequence Chuck had demonstrated, his technique flawless in its own way. The difference was subtle but profound, where Chuck's movements carried the weight of lived experience. Jordan's showcased raw talent and athletic precision. When he finished, Jordan turned to Chuck. "I learned that form when I was 14. My sensei said I mastered it in a month." There was no arrogance in the statement, just an acknowledgement of his natural ability. "Your technique is excellent," Chuck replied, his voice carrying easily through the silent arena. "How often do you still practice it?" Jordan looked away. "I don't. Once I competed with it and won, I moved on to more advanced material." Chuck nodded, understanding rather than judging. "I've practiced that same form nearly every day for 60 years. The simple statement landed with quiet force. Jordan's eyebrows rose slightly. "Every day? Even after you'd mastered it?" "That's the thing about mastery," Chuck said. "It isn't a destination you reach, it's a path you walk every day." In the audience, the young boy with the yellow belt leaned forward, absorbing every word. "The difference you're feeling right now," Jake said, addressing Jordan but loud enough for the crowd to hear, "between performing a movement and embodying it, that's what we're trying to show these young people. Technique without depth is just motion. Technique with faith behind it becomes purpose." Jordan nodded slowly, processing. For perhaps the first time that night, there was no performance in his response, just genuine consideration. "Would you be willing," Jakes continued, "to help demonstrate one more thing for these young people?" Jordan glanced at Chuck, then back to Jakes. "What did you have in mind?" "The power of humility," Jakes replied. "Would you and Chuck work together to show these children what it looks like when skill serves something greater than ego?" There was a vulnerability in the request that might have triggered Jordan's defensiveness earlier. But something had shifted in him. He looked at Chuck, seeking confirmation. Chuck nodded once. "I'd be honored." What followed wasn't choreographed or rehearsed, yet it unfolded with a natural harmony that held the audience spellbound. Chuck and Jordan moved through a series of techniques, Chuck demonstrating, Jordan following, each adjusting to the other's energy and presence. There was no competition in their exchange, no hierarchy. Just two martial artists with different journeys sharing a moment of mutual respect. When Chuck corrected Jordan's elbow position slightly during one movement, Jordan accepted the adjustment without defensiveness, immediately incorporating it into his next repetition. In the press section, Alyssa found herself setting aside her professional detachment. Her producer's voice buzzed in her ear. "Are you getting this? This is golden." But she barely registered it. What she was witnessing transcended the story she'd come to cover. It wasn't about faith versus fighting or church versus cage. It was about something more fundamental, the difference between using skill to elevate oneself and using it to elevate others. The demonstration concluded with both men bowing to each other, then to the audience. The applause began slowly, then built to a thunderous crescendo. Not the frenzied cheering of a fight crowd, but something deeper. Recognition, respect, reverence. Jake stepped forward, his timing impeccable as always. "This," he said, "is what we mean by faith and power. Not faith instead of power, but faith guiding power toward its highest purpose." He turned to the children in the audience. "Remember what you saw tonight. Not just the skill, but the spirit behind it. Not just the technique, but the truth it expresses." Jordan stood quietly, his usual post-performance bravado noticeably absent. In its place was something less flashy but more substantial, a centeredness that hadn't been there before. A small commotion near the ring steps caught their attention. The young boy with the yellow belt had approached the ring, his father close behind with an apologetic expression. The boy held out a program and a pen, looking up at Jordan with wide eyes. "Sorry," the father began. "He just wanted—" "No problem," Jordan said, his voice gentler than anyone had heard it all night. He knelt at the ropes, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "What's your name, buddy?" "Marcus," the boy replied. "I just started karate. I'm not very good yet." Jordan took the program and pen. "You know something, Marcus? I wasn't very good when I started either." The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. "Really? But you're the Cobra." Jordan glanced at Chuck, who was watching the interaction with quiet approval. Then back to Marcus. "The thing is, being good isn't as important as being dedicated. It's showing up every day, even when it's hard." As he spoke, he signed the program, adding something extra before handing it back. Marcus looked down at the signature and the words Jordan had written. "Practice with purpose." "Will you be back next year?" Marcus asked. "For the next Faith and Power?" Jordan hesitated, glancing at Jakes, who had been watching the exchange with thoughtful eyes. "If Bishop Jakes will have me," Jordan replied. "I'd like that very much." Jakes stepped forward, placing a hand on Jordan's shoulder. The door is always open for those seeking to grow. The moment carried a weight beyond the words themselves. An invitation not just to return to the event, but to continue the journey that had unexpectedly begun tonight. As Marcus returned to his seat, clutching the signed program like a treasure, Jordan turned to Chuck. "Thank you," he said simply. "For the lesson." Chuck nodded once. "The best thanks is what you do with it." The words weren't delivered as a challenge or expectation, just a quiet truth offered from one martial artist to another. Jordan nodded, accepting the weight of their meaning. Alyssa, who had moved closer to capture the exchange, found herself lowering her microphone. Some moments deserve to be witnessed, not broadcast. Her cameraman seemed to understand, lowering his equipment as well. As the event transitioned to its next segment, Jordan quietly exited the ring, not with the flashy vault he'd used to enter, but with deliberate, mindful steps. The difference wasn't lost on those who'd been watching closely. In the quiet of the backstage area, away from the lights and eyes of the crowd, Jordan paused. For the first time that night, perhaps for the first time in longer than he could remember, he wasn't thinking about how others saw him. He was simply present, feeling the weight of something shifting within him. It wasn't a complete transformation. Such things don't happen in an instant. But it was a beginning. A crack in the armor of ego, letting in the first light of something deeper. And for tonight, that was enough. The event continued with testimonials from young people whose lives had been changed by the church's martial arts ministry. Each story followed a similar arc. Troubled beginnings transformed through discipline, community, and faith. But the audience's attention remained divided, many still processing what they had witnessed between Chuck Norris and Jordan Reigns. In the green room, Jordan sat alone, staring at his phone but not really seeing it. Notifications flooded in comments on his social accounts, texts from friends who'd been watching the live stream, calls from his manager. He ignored them all. The door opened, and Alyssa Carter stepped in, her network badge giving her access most reporters wouldn't have received. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. Her tone professional but gentler than the hard-hitting approach she usually took with celebrities. Jordan looked up, expecting to see judgment or, worse, pity in her eyes. He found neither, just genuine curiosity. "Let me guess," he said, a shadow of his earlier sarcasm returning. "You want the exclusive on how the Cobra got humbled in church." Alyssa sat down across from him, setting her recorder aside, rather than activating it. "Actually," she said, "I was thinking this might be a conversation, not an interview." Jordan studied her. Suspicious. Reporters don't do conversations. They do stories. "Maybe tonight isn't about the story I thought it was." She held his gaze. "Or maybe it's a bigger one." Something in her candor resonated with the shift Jordan was still processing within himself. He nodded slightly. An acknowledgement rather than agreement. "What happened out there?" she asked. "From your perspective, not from my broadcast." Jordan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice lacked its usual performative confidence. "I'm not entirely sure." "Try," she said, not unkindly. He rubbed his face, suddenly looking younger than his 27 years. "I came here thinking it was a publicity appearance. Show up. Throw some flashy techniques, sign some autographs, get some content for my socials." He shook his head. "I didn't expect him. Chuck Norris? Not just Chuck Norris the celebrity. Chuck Norris I don't know how to describe it." Jordan struggled for words. Unfamiliar territory for someone whose public persona was built on glib confidence. The man has a presence that can't be faked. Can't be performed. Alyssa nodded. She'd felt it too, the difference between Jordan's practiced charisma and Chuck's effortless authority. "I've been in the ring with world champions," Jordan continued, "guys who could tear most men apart. But I've never felt what I felt standing across from him." He looked up at her. "He wasn't even fighting me, and I still felt outmatched. But not in the way I expected." "What do you mean?" "In fighting, there's always a hierarchy. Someone's faster. Someone's stronger. Someone's more technical." Jordan's focus turned inward, examining the experience with surprising self-awareness. This wasn't about physical ability. It was about wholeness, I guess. Like he wasn't trying to prove anything, because he knows exactly who he is. Alyssa considered this. "And that made you feel?" "Like I don't," Jordan admitted, the words emerging with difficulty. "Know who I am, I mean. Beyond the record, the rankings, the followers." He gestured to his phone. I'm at the top of my division. I should feel complete. But tonight made me realize I've been fighting to fill something that victories can't touch. The vulnerability in his admission caught Alyssa off guard. This wasn't the brash fighter who'd strutted into the ring earlier. It wasn't even the slightly humbled athlete who'd walked out. This was something rarer, a genuine moment of self-reflection. For what it's worth, she said after a moment, that kind of realization takes its own kind of strength. Jordan smiled faintly. Not the camera-ready grin he'd flashed earlier, but something more subdued and authentic. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just shook from meeting Chuck Norris. They both laughed, breaking the tension. So what happens now? Alyssa asked. The Cobra returns to the UFC? Business as usual? Jordan was quiet again, considering. I don't know. The fight next month happens for sure. But maybe some things change. He met her eyes. Off the record? She nodded. I'm tired, he admitted. Not physically, but the persona, the constant performance, the need to always be on. It's exhausting being the Cobra 24/7. So, who are you when you're not the Cobra? The question hung between them. Jordan had no ready answer. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Deacon Ellis entered, his presence filling the small room. Mr. Raines, he said, his deep voice respectful. Bishop Jakes would like to speak with you, if you're willing. And Mr. Norris has asked to say goodbye before he leaves. Jordan stood, straightening his shoulders. Alyssa noticed the subtle shift in his demeanor. Not a return to the performative swagger, but a deliberate composure, as if consciously choosing how to carry himself. Lead the way, he said to Ellis. As they left, Alyssa remained seated, thinking about the story that had unfolded before her. Not the one she'd expected to cover. Celebrity fighter makes appearance at church event, but something with more layers, more humanity, more truth. She picked up her recorder, then set it down again. Some moments deserved reflection before broadcast. In the main hallway outside the auditorium, Bishop Jakes was speaking with Chuck Norris. Both men turned as Jordan approached, their conversation pausing naturally. Jordan, Jakes greeted him with genuine warmth. Thank you for staying. I wanted to personally express my gratitude for your participation tonight. Jordan nodded, accepting the thanks without deflecting it with humor or bravado, as he might have earlier. Thank you for having me, Bishop. It was educational. A slight smile crossed Chuck's weathered face at the understatement. I was just telling Chuck, Jakes continued, about our youth program's expansion. We're opening 3 new dojos in underserved neighborhoods next month. That's great, Jordan said, his interest genuine. Those kids need positive outlets. Indeed they do. Jakes studied him thoughtfully. Which brings me to something I'd like to propose, if you're open to it. Jordan waited, attentive. Our programs connect these young people with mentors, individuals, who can guide them not just in technique, but in character development. Jakes held Jordan's gaze. We could use someone who understands both the discipline of martial arts and the struggles young people face today. Jordan blinked, caught off guard. You're asking me to mentor? After what happened tonight? Because of what happened tonight, Jakes corrected gently. Growth isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise afterward. These kids don't need perfect examples, they need real ones. The offer hung in the air between them. Jordan looked to Chuck, perhaps seeking guidance or validation. The hardest person to defeat, Chuck said quietly, is the one you see in the mirror each morning. Tonight, you showed you're ready to face that opponent honestly. That's a lesson worth sharing. Jordan absorbed this, the weight of it visible in his expression. He turned back to Jake's. I have a full training schedule, fights lined up for the next year at least. Jake's nodded, understanding. The door remains open. Whenever and however you're able. Even a single afternoon can change a young person's perspective. Something shifted in Jordan's eyes, a recognition, perhaps, of the opportunity being offered, not just to rehabilitate his image or gain positive press, but to channel his gifts towards something beyond personal glory. I'd like that, he said finally. Not as the Cobra, but as Jordan. If that's okay. That, Jake said with a warm smile, is precisely what these young people need. Chuck extended his hand. Jordan took it, the handshake firm but without the competitive tension that often accompanied such gestures between athletes. Thank you, Jordan said simply, for the lesson. The journey's just beginning, Chuck replied. But you've taken the hardest step seeing the need for it. As they parted ways, Jordan felt a strange lightness he couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't until he was halfway down the corridor that he recognized it, the absence of the constant need to perform, to impress, to dominate. For this moment at least, he was simply present, neither defending nor attacking, neither conquering nor being conquered. Back in the arena, the event was concluding. Jakes had returned to the stage for final remarks, the spotlight following him as he addressed the audience one last time. Faith isn't about what we say we believe, he told the rapt crowd. It's about how we live those beliefs, especially when tested. He gestured to the ring where the night's unexpected demonstration had unfolded. Tonight, we've witnessed strength that goes beyond the physical. The strength to remain centered when provoked. The strength to reconsider deeply held positions. The strength to begin again with new understanding. In the third row, young Marcus clutched his signed program, his father's arm around his shoulders. The boy's eyes were wide with wonder, absorbing not just the words but the living example he'd witnessed. As we leave tonight, Jakes continued, let's carry this question with us. What kind of strength do we want to embody in the world? The kind that dominates others to elevate ourselves, or the kind that lifts others while remaining humbly grounded? The question resonated through the arena, touching each person differently according to their own journey. As the house lights came up and people began gathering their things, the young boy tugged his father's sleeve. Dad, he said, eyes serious. I want to practice my form every day. Like Mr. Norris. His father smiled, recognizing something significant in his son's determination. That's a big commitment, buddy. What made you decide that? The boy looked down at the program in his hands, then up at the now empty ring. Because I want to be strong on the inside, not just the outside. In that simple declaration from a child's lips, the evening's message found its purest expression. Not in theological complexity or physical prowess, but in the recognition that true strength begins with the spirit that animates the body. Faith, not as passive belief, but as active, living principle. As the crowd dispersed into the Texas night, the ripples of what had transpired continued to spread through social media posts, through conversations on the drive home, through quiet reflections in the privacy of individual hearts. What had begun as spectacle had transformed into parable, its meaning still unfolding long after the lights dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling. The Texas stars hung in the velvet night as the last vehicles pulled away from Glory and Grace Megachurch. Only a few staff vehicles and media vans remained, the massive Faith and Power banners now illuminated solely by security floodlights, casting long shadows across the emptying parking lot. In a quiet corner of the vacant auditorium, Alyssa Carter sat cross-legged on the edge of the stage, her laptop open before her. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then retreated. The article she'd outlined before the event, celebrity fighter makes church appearance, now felt hollow, missing the deeper currents that had flowed beneath the surface of what she'd witnessed. She typed a few sentences, deleted them, tried again. How could she capture the subtle transformation she'd seen in Jordan Reigns? The quiet authority that had emanated from Chuck Norris without a single showy technique? The moment when posturing gave way to authenticity? Finding the right words? She looked up to see Bishop Jakes approaching. His formal jacket exchanged for a simple cardigan. His public persona softened into something more contemplative. Not exactly, she admitted, closing her laptop. Some stories resist the usual formulas. Jakes nodded, understanding. The most meaningful ones often do. He sat down beside her, his presence carrying the same centered quality it had throughout the evening, but more relaxed now. What you witnessed tonight wasn't a spectacle, though it looked like one at first. It was a collision of worldviews, and perhaps the beginning of a transformation. Do you think anything will actually change? Alyssa asked. For Jordan, I mean. Or was this just a moment that will fade once he's back in his world of spotlights and sponsors? Jakes considered the question with appropriate gravity. Transformation isn't a moment, it's a journey. What matters isn't whether he stumbles tomorrow, but whether he remembers how to stand back up. Like faith, Alyssa observed. Precisely. Jakes smiled. Not a perfect performance, but a consistent practice. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the empty arena holding echoes of the night's energy. I came here as a skeptic, Alyssa admitted finally. I've covered plenty of events that blend celebrity and spirituality. They usually feel manufactured. And tonight? Tonight felt real. Messy and unplanned, but real. Jakes nodded, pleased with her assessment. Truth often emerges most clearly when our scripts fail us. Their conversation was interrupted as Deacon Ellis approached, his steps echoing in the empty space. Bishop, the team is ready for final prayer before lockup, he said. Then, noticing Alyssa, he added with gentle firmness, We'll need to close the building soon, ma'am. Of course, she replied, gathering her things. Actually, Jake said, I'd like to invite Miss Carter to join our closing circle if she's willing. He turned to her. No obligation to participate, just to witness. Alyssa hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'd be honored. In the staff area behind the stage, about 30 people had formed a loose circle: sound technicians, lighting operators, security personnel, volunteers. The hierarchy of titles had temporarily dissolved as they stood shoulder to shoulder. Jakes entered with Alyssa, gesturing for her to find a place. Ellis closed the circle, his large presence somehow comforting rather than intimidating now. Before we close tonight, Jakes said, addressing the team, I want to thank each of you for your part in what happened here. What began as a planned event became something more: a living testimony to the principle we aim to demonstrate, that true strength flows from something deeper than muscle or technique. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the circle. I also want to welcome Alyssa Carter, who's been covering our event for national broadcast. He gestured toward her. She's joining us not as press, but as a fellow seeker of truth. Alyssa felt unexpectedly moved by the simple acknowledgement, not of her professional role, but of her human journey. Jakes's closing prayer wasn't the formal invocation Alyssa had expected. Instead, he spoke conversationally, as if addressing a close friend. We recognize that true change comes not from moments of insight, but from the patient work of daily practice. For Jordan, for the young people who watched tonight, for each of us, may we remember that faith isn't proven in the spotlight, but in the quiet moments when no one is watching. Amen, came the soft chorus from around the circle. As the group dispersed, Alyssa found herself approaching Ellis, a question that had lingered all evening finally taking shape. "Deacon," she began, "may I ask you something?" The big man nodded, his stern features softening. "Of course. You've seen both worlds, military combat and church security. When Jordan was challenging Chuck, I noticed you were ready to intervene, but Bishop Jakes held you back. What did he see that perhaps others missed?" Ellis considered the question, with the thoughtfulness of a man who chose his words carefully. "In the Marines, I learned that true warriors aren't the ones eager to prove themselves," he said finally. "They're the ones who understand the cost of conflict and choose their battles wisely." His gaze shifted to the now empty ring. "What Bishop saw, what I came to see, was that the real battle wasn't between two fighters. It was within Jordan himself. A battle between ego and something deeper." Alyssa nodded, understanding dawning. "Exactly." Ellis smiled slightly. "Some lessons can only be learned through experience. Jordan needed to feel the difference between force and power, between dominance and mastery. And Chuck was the perfect teacher. Because he had nothing to prove," Ellis agreed. "When you're secure in who you are, you don't need others to validate your worth." The insight struck Alyssa as applicable far beyond martial arts, to journalism, to faith, to every arena of human striving. As she headed toward the exit, a notification lit up her phone. The live stream clip of Chuck and Jordan's encounter had already gathered over 2 million views. The comment section was filled with reactions more substantive than the usual online chatter. "Came for the fight. Stayed for the lesson. Never seen someone win by not fighting before. The way Chuck just stood there is greater than any knockout I've ever seen." The online conversation was continuing what had begun in the arena, a recognition that true strength often looks different than expected. That mastery isn't always about dominance. That faith expresses itself not in words, but in centered presence under pressure. Across town, in a luxury hotel suite, Jordan Rains sat alone on the balcony. The city lights spread out before him. His phone lay silent on the table. Notifications muted. Social media apps closed. His entourage had been dismissed for the night. Their offers of clubs and after-parties declined. For perhaps the first time since his career had taken off, Jordan was simply sitting with his thoughts, letting them surface without immediate distraction. What Chuck had demonstrated wasn't just physical mastery, it was emotional and spiritual centeredness, the ability to remain present and authentic under pressure. Jordan's fighting career had been built on the opposite principle, crafting a persona larger than life, louder than doubt, flashier than fear. The Cobra struck first, struck hard, left no question of dominance. But beneath the persona, questions had been growing, unaddressed, until tonight's unexpected encounter had brought them to the surface. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. He considered ignoring it, but something compelled him to answer. His manager stood in the hallway, tablet in hand, looking both confused and excited. "Have you seen the numbers? The clip is going viral. Your social engagement is up 300% in the last 3 hours. Jordan nodded, unsurprised but unmoved by the metrics. "We need to capitalize on this," his manager continued, stepping into the suite uninvited. "I've got 3 podcast requests already. ESPN wants you for a segment, and your sponsor is loving the expanded demographic reach." Jordan listened without responding, struck by how hollow the familiar language of brand building suddenly sounded. "The angle is perfect," his manager pressed on, mistaking silence for interest. "The Cobra meets faith. We can play it either way depending on the audience. For the fight fans, we emphasize your challenge to a legend. For the family demographic, we show your respectful side. No, Jordan said quietly. His manager paused mid-sentence. No what? No to all of it. No angles. No playing it different ways for different audiences. Jordan's voice was calm, but firm. That's exactly what tonight was about letting go of. But the opportunity isn't what you think it is. Jordan met his manager's confused gaze directly. The opportunity isn't to monetize a moment, it's to learn from it. After his manager left, clearly baffled, Jordan returned to the balcony. The night air carried a clarity that matched his emerging thoughts. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The fighting world wouldn't understand his shift any more than his manager had. The Cobra persona had made him famous, made him rich, built a career that most fighters could only dream of. But for tonight, at least, he could sit with the question Chuck's presence had awakened in him. Who am I when I'm not performing? What strength remains when the spectacle fades? Across the city, in a much simpler hotel room, Chuck Norris knelt in evening prayer. At 75, his body carried the marks of decades of training, old injuries that ached in changing weather, joints that had sacrificed cushioning to thousands of impacts. Yet he moved with the fluidity of a man at peace with both his capabilities and his limitations. After finishing his prayers, he picked up his phone and called his wife. "It's me," he said when the call connected. "Just checking in before tomorrow's hospital visit. How did the event go?" Her warm voice came through. "Not quite as planned," he replied with a small smile. "But exactly as needed. The bishop's events often work out that way," she observed. "And the young fighter? Jordan something?" "Reigns," Chuck supplied. "Jordan Reigns. He has tremendous potential. And not just in fighting. You saw something in him. It wasn't a question." After decades together, she knew how her husband's mind worked, his ability to see beyond current behavior to underlying character. "I saw myself at that age," Chuck admitted. "Talented but ungrounded. Skilled but searching. And now? Now there's a crack in the armor. What grows through it depends on what he nurtures." 6 weeks later, the doors of the newest Glory and Grace Youth Dojo opened in East Houston. The facility was modest but well-equipped, serving a neighborhood where positive outlets for young energy were scarce. A dozen children in fresh white gis lined up on the mats, eyes wide with excitement and nervousness. At the front of the room stood Jordan Reigns, not in his usual flashy fight gear, but in a simple black G with no logos or sponsorship patches. Beside him, Master Chen, the instructor from the charity event, nodded encouragingly. "Before we begin learning techniques," Jordan said, his voice gentler than the children had expected from the Cobra, "I want to share something my own teacher reminded me of recently." He glanced at Master Chen. "Martial arts isn't about defeating others. It's about mastering yourself." The children watched, rapt with attention, as Jordan led them through a basic form, the same one he had practiced with Chuck Norris weeks earlier. His movements were different now, more mindful, less performative. Each position flowed into the next with purposeful attention rather than flashy speed. A small figure appeared in the doorway, Marcus, the young boy with the yellow belt from the charity event, his father standing behind him. Jordan noticed them and smiled, gesturing for them to enter. "Perfect timing," he said. "We were just practicing the form you saw that night." Marcus beamed, taking his place in the line of students. His yellow belt stood out among the white ones, but his eager attention matched his peers. As Jordan guided the children through the movements, his phone remained silent in his bag, notifications muted. Social media paused. For these 2 hours each week, he wasn't the Cobra, UFC champion and social media sensation. He was simply Jordan, passing on what he'd learned about discipline, respect, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are beyond the titles and achievements. In the back of the room, unnoticed by most, Alyssa Carter observed quietly, notebook closed, simply witnessing. Beside her stood Deacon Ellis, his usually stern expression softened as he watched the champion fighter guiding tiny hands into proper positions with surprising gentleness. "It won't make headlines," Alyssa murmured. "But this is the real story, isn't it?" Ellis nodded. "Faith doesn't shout for attention. It whispers through consistent actions when no one's watching." He glanced at her. "Though I suppose someone is watching." "Don't worry," she replied. "Some moments deserve to be witnessed, not broadcast." As the class continued, Jordan demonstrated a simple technique for maintaining balance when pushed. "The mistake most people make," he explained, "is trying to resist force with force. Instead, we learn to redirect energy." Marcus raised his hand, his face serious. "Is that how Mr. Norris stayed so calm when you challenged him? By redirecting?" The innocent question might have stung Jordan's pride weeks ago. Now, he smiled at the child's perception. "Exactly right," he confirmed. "He showed me that real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about mastering yourself, especially when under pressure." On the wall of the dojo hung a simple framed quote, not from Jordan's highlight reel or fight promos, but from the night that had redirected his journey. "Faith doesn't block punches. It reminds you why you're fighting in the first place, and who you're fighting for." Chuck Norris. Below it, Jordan had added in his own handwriting, "True power isn't proven by dominating others. It's demonstrated by mastering yourself." As the last child left with parents in tow, Jordan paused to straighten the frame, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. The face that looked back wasn't the cobra, coiled and ready to strike. It was simply Jordan, a man still learning, still growing, still practicing the hardest fight of all, the daily discipline of becoming his best self. Outside, life in Houston continued its busy pace. News cycles churned. Social media trends rose and fell. New champions were crowned, while others faded from memory. But within those dojo walls, something timeless was taking root, the quiet power of faith in action. Strength that didn't need to announce itself, mastery that spoke through consistent practice rather than momentary performance. For Jordan Reigns, that journey was just beginning unfolding, not in viral moments or championship bouts, but in the quiet integrity of a life aligned with deeper purpose. The transformation wasn't complete, such journeys never are. But with each class taught, each form practiced, each principle embodied rather than merely preached, the path became clearer. Not faith versus power, but faith and power inseparable, like body and spirit, technique and intention, presence and purpose. A truth not shouted from the mountaintops, but lived in the valley of daily practice, where real champions are formed not in moments of glory, but in consistent choices when no one is watching. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.